Good evening. This is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Airwolf Season 2 on Blu-ray. Now, Season 2 was a departure from Season 1 in the sense that studio executives, in order to boost ratings, decided to try and make the show a little more family-friendly. Because Season 1, it was a little more grim than, people were used to, I guess. Because of the focus on, espionage plots. And so, they wanted to make it to where, I guess, families could watch it and relate more to it. And they also made it to where the plot lines tended to deal with more domestic threats than international threats, which is certainly made for a broader range of stories. Although personally, I wish that there had been more of an even split focus on international espionage stories as well as domestic, because there is definitely more of a focus on domestic stories than international espionage stories. But it definitely results in a variety of intriguing episodes that come into play, um, and the fact that this season has 22 episodes as opposed to the 11 or 12 that the first season had, um, there's definitely more to work with in terms of storytelling, or the types of stories that can be told. Um, and for the first half of the season, it's pretty good. But unfortunately, it does kind of lose its way in the second half. But I'll get to that in a sec here. So one of the things I liked, right off the bat, I'll say is the introduction of Jean Bruce Scott as the character of Caitlin O'Shaughnessy. And Caitlin was a really neat character, and she was definitely brought in to appeal to a more broader audience. But they made her into a well-written character played by a good actress. And I appreciate how her introduction into the series was gradual, as opposed to, say, she's thrown into one episode and she's instantly part of the team. Everyone has to like her, the audience has to like her. But no, 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 nothing like that. It was a work in progress. She's introduced in the very first episode, Sweet Britches. And she's a desert rescue helicopter pilot, police officer, if you will. And her case and Hawk and Santini's, their cases intersect, and a couple episodes later, her character comes back, and she gradually becomes a regular fixture of the series until she ends up officially being a part of the Airwolf team. And so by the time she's in the copter with Hawk and Santini, you're like, well done, kid, you earned it. And she was easy on the eyes. She can hold her own in a hostile situation, and she was a likable character, and so she was definitely a welcome addition to the team. And I also liked how, I guess, to go along with the whole family friendly idea, they made it to where, say, the characters of, Hawk and Santini, there's a lot more of a family vibe with them now. I mean, there already was in season one, but there was a little more, I guess, hopefulness, if you will. Hawk, he's not as grim as he was in season one. It's like, he's gotten to a point where, hey, my surrogate father and I have, made it through some insane situations, with this high-tech helicopter, in this government agency, and well, we're still alive. There's hope. And the fact that they've got this new team member with them, when she's with them, it's almost like her pluckiness and optimism rubs off on them, to a point where there's a rather nice family dynamic with the three of them. And it was really cool because that sort of enhanced the range of emotions that the characters were allowed to portray. Namely, Hawk being able to be a little more optimistic, and Santini, the guy was already optimistic, but it's just it's nice to it was nice to see the characters not being you know forced into one emotional extreme. That makes sense. So anyway, though, yeah, I appreciated that, and also I liked how each of the main characters, they get kind of a spotlight episode or two, um, which showcases the range of the actors to good effect usually. A couple of episodes, they focus more on Hawk, trying to find his brother who was MIA in Vietnam, and in the episodes that deal with that, you actually see just how good of an actor the late Jan Michael Vincent was in terms of his dramatic depth, because it was interesting seeing him being the tough loner, doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue to say in season one, and then you see him in season two to where he's a little more hopeful and optimistic about things, and then you see whenever he's dealing with his brother, you see that it's still affecting him, and I really like that they were able to utilize the acting talents of Jan Michael Vincent in that regard. And Ernest Borgnine, he's still great as Dominique Santini, still happy-go-lucky. He's got everyone's back, but he gets an episode or two where you see just how good of a dramatic actor he was, especially in an episode where he found out that he had a wife and daughter that no one knew about, and it was a really tragic story. And and I liked how they showed the depth of the characters, and they even have a spotlight episode for the character of Archangel, as played by Alex Cord, and probably one of my favorite episodes of the season, called Archangel Down, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, though, yeah. So the episode dealing with him shows some really strong acting talent on Alex Cord's part, and he gets to portray the character of Archangel as more of a human being because of the situation he's in. Namely, he's kidnapped by some old enemies of his, falls into a trap, and basically they torture him and try to brainwash him into betraying the firm. And so not only is it a good character focus episode, but you just see how good of an actor Alex Cord can be when he's given like the majority of an episode to work with. I mean, you find out some things about his past. You find out his real name's Michael. And the episode also has easily one of the best action sequences of the season, as well as the series itself. A really cool nighttime raid in which Airwolf, the helicopter, is having to sort of hover in place outside of this German fortress, a castle that's, basically got a whole army there, and they're firing at Airwolf like crazy. Anti-aircraft guns, rocket launchers, what have you, and Airwolf's having to hover in place, or at least within a certain distance of part of the fortress in order to be able to pick up Hawk and Archangel. And it's actually a pretty suspenseful scene because it's taking a lot of damage, taking a lot of fire. Caitlin's having to, she's just recently, gotten to where she can operate some of the systems, and she's having to work with Santini, to, get the coordinates set up to where they can fire back at the enemies. And it's a really well shot sequence. And it really looks like a full on battle at night. So that was probably one of my favorite episodes, both in terms of, like character development as well as action sequences. And so, and a couple of the episodes I really enjoyed had an almost horror movie angle to them, which definitely made them stand out more than some of the episodes ordinarily would. There was an episode called Moffat's Ghost, which involves a computer virus left by the long dead Moffat, the mad scientist who created the helicopter in the first place, and who was definitely blown off the face of the earth at the end of the pilot in season 1. Anyway, though, turns out he leaves a little parting gift in the way of a computer virus, on board Airwolf, which, basically, if the helicopter goes a certain amount of time without getting a signal from him, then it will essentially start flying by itself and start taking out friendly targets and thus start World War III. So when you have, it's the equivalent of having a smart car no longer obeying your, directions or, driving or what have you, except instead of just running out civilians, this thing could literally just start taking out targets, that would result in Armageddon. All for the sake of, this long dead scientist, getting one last sick joke on the world. And so definitely a, sort of haunted helicopter vibe. And it was pretty cool. Also, there were a couple of episodes. They even had like, some good psycho antagonists. Truth About Holly. Even if you can kind of tell what's going to happen, who's really causing all the trouble, there's a really good moment towards the end, involving kind of an alone with the psycho moment, in which basically there's one of the main characters is literally alone with the psycho, in a dangerous situation, and the acting on said psycho's part at this moment when they're giving their monologue and you find out what's really going on, it's a pretty spooky moment just because of how relatively helpless the main character is with this psycho, and also the fact that when you hear what they're saying, you probably know a few people like this, or at least know someone who does know a person like this. So even though it wasn't a great episode, that particular episode, it gets at some points for that sort of real world type psychological horror at the climax, if you will, not throughout the whole episode, but for that particular climax. Another episode was called The Hunted. The actor Greg Henry guest stars as the bad guy, and he's really good at playing bad guys. He played the main villain in that Mel Gibson movie Payback, and here in his guest role, he's a very cold, ruthless assassin. And basically his modus operandi is, anyone who knows of his existence ends up dying, mysteriously, after they're done working with him, because he doesn't want people to know he exists. And so Greg Henry's naturally good at playing a villain. And so when he gets involved with the character of Caitlin, and she doesn't know he's a bad guy, obviously, but the fact that we like her character and have come to care about her, and the fact that she gets involved as unknowingly getting involved with this guy who's good at playing psychos, you kind of feel a sense of danger there. And so I thought that was another good example of sort of horror being used to some degree in the episode. And also one of my personal favorite episodes is called Condemned, in which basically involves this virus on a secluded island that was developed by military scientists that, of course, gets out of control. But things go wrong. Just about everyone goes insane, kills each other. And so, Hawk and Caitlin, they have to go to the island, try to find out what went wrong, find out, what the virus, like what, if there was like a counter agent to the virus, or if they could, find any survivors. And also the Russians get involved because it turns out it was created by a rogue agency on their end in the first place. And so it's interesting, you have this really suspenseful situation in which you have this virus that is infecting everyone, including the main characters, that are in the episode, that is, Hawk and Caitlin. Um, and so, not only is it infecting them, but, they're having to work with the Russians who aren't necessarily, I mean, I guess you could kind of say they're on the enemy side, but at the same time, they're not outright villains in this particular episode. I mean, they have a job to do. They're trying to find out all they can about the virus, but at the same time, if need be, they're willing to destroy it because they realize, hey, regardless of whether we're in a Cold War, no, the world doesn't deserve to get wasted by this thing. And so it was a pretty suspenseful episode, and I enjoyed that aspect of it, as well as sort of the callback to the Russians having a more, I guess, three-dimensional, character depiction or portrayal that they usually did in season one. It was a nice callback to that. So I really enjoyed the first half of season two. You definitely have some strong episodes, and I would even say classic episodes, Airwolf, in the first half of season two alone. But on the downside, though, because of the family-friendly focus, there's not as much of the firm, the government agency that Archangel works for. There's not much of a focus on them, and they're sort of relegated to the background with the exception of a couple of episodes. And also, they're not on the, I guess, morally ambiguous side of things that they were in season one. They're more, yes, we're a bureaucratic government agency, but we're the good guys this time. And so I feel like in that respect, there was a certain element of suspense that was missing from season two in comparison to season one, because you didn't know who you could trust in terms of, in relation to the firm. And the character of Archangel, he's definitely more on the side of good this time around. Like, he's definitely a good guy here. But with the exception of Archangel, the episode that spotlights his character, Fallen Angel. That's what the episode is called. Sorry, I kept on saying Archangel's Down, I think. But the episode is called Fallen Angel. With the exception of that episode, Fallen Angel, which easily one of the best episodes of season two, Archangel doesn't get much of a focus. In fact, he's kind of pushed into the background for the most part. And also, I neglected to mention in season one, the character of Morella, as played by Deborah Pratt. She was also a character that I liked, and she was a part of the firm as well. But, because of the lack of focus on the firm, her character is sidelined even more than Archangel is. And so, that was a bummer. I mean, so on the plus side, we did have the character of Caitlin being introduced and becoming, a main part of the crew, even though Morella was kind of pushed to the sidelines. So anyway, though, there is, like I said, a lack of suspense because of the fact that the firm is firmly on the side of good this time around, at least in relation to the main characters. And so that was one of the downsides of season two. Also, the second half of season two, unfortunately, is not as good as the first half of season two. Partially because I think that, when they were going with the whole domestic threat angle, they initially did a good job with it and had some variety to it. But at a certain point, though, I would say after the episode Condemned, it starts to get really predictable. And granted, every show is going to have its formula, but not only was it predictable, but it started to literally feel like I was watching another show. Like certain plot developments would come up that um, I'd be thinking to myself, I mean, okay, I know I'm watching Airwolf, but I could have sworn I saw this plot in, an episode of, I don't know, Rockford Files or Magnum PI or Miami Vice, that kind of thing. I think Rockford Files is a more 70s show, but anyway, though, I could be mistaken about that. But anyway, so I felt like at times I was watching Miami Vice or just another show from the 80s. And I mean, I'm not trying to slight these other shows. It's just that when you sit down to watch Miami Vice, you want to feel like you're watching Miami Vice. If you're wanting to sit down to watch Airwolf, you want to feel like you're watching Airwolf. And it honestly didn't feel like I was watching Airwolf, past a certain point in season 2. And so not only that, but it got very predictable. And I started to lose interest. And I mean, I was still watching, but whereas I was very invested, say like in season 1 or this first half of season 2, here I was like, I'm watching it, but I'm already thinking about other things. Like, okay, what do I need to do tomorrow? What book, can I read, next, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it just didn't hold my attention as much. And and also, I mean, I think the low point for me, it was an episode called Out of the Sky, which, I mean, I'm not going to say it was a terrible episode, but it was definitely the low point of season 2 because, it involves, you know, a, it involves, Hawk having to bodyguard a country a female country singer, and sort of like a Dolly Parton XP, I guess. And so you go from espionage to domestic threats to, well, yeah, country music. I mean, nothing against country music, but you don't really see the two, Airwolf and Dolly Parton XP. Yeah, it's not a good combination. so so yeah, that was definitely the low point of season 2. Uh and definitely the worst example of, okay, this is predictable and it feels like another show altogether. What's going on here? And on the other downside, of this particular season, uh, it in fact deals with the actor Jan Michael Vincent. Now, I realize I already gave credit to him for giving a more well-rounded performance in season 2, at least as far as the first half goes, in the sense that his character tends to be more well-rounded, more emotions to play with, and he does a good job with that. But at a certain point in season 2, um, well, okay, I'll just go ahead and say it. I didn't mention it in season 1 because it didn't show up on screen, but in real life, behind the scenes, Jan Michael Vincent sadly had a really bad drinking and drug problem. And I don't know how long it went on exactly. It varies on depending on who you talk to. But in Airwolf, though, when he was on the show, that's when it began to get really bad. And I guess some artists, actors, they're able to, I mean, they have their demons and what have you, but they're able to keep them contained while they do their thing, and it doesn't really show up on screen. Well, at a certain point in season 2, unfortunately, it does start to show up on screen. It wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be, from what other reviewers were talking about. But there were definitely moments where you're like, okay, I know your character got the crap beat out of him, a couple of episodes back, but that was like 5 or 6 episodes ago. I mean, don't you think? I mean, shouldn't you be okay now? I mean, why are you still wobbly? And that's the main thing I noticed is that there were there were several episodes in the second half of season 2 where he seems kind of unsteady on his feet. He seems really tired, and you know when you find out about the whole, drug and alcohol problem, going on behind the scenes, that's when you realize it's actually showing up on screen. And when, I mean, it's regardless of who you are, that's not a good spot to be in, especially if you're the main top billed star of a TV series. And it was really sad to see him like that. You know, I'm not I'm not trying to take up for the guy necessarily, but just for the fact that I saw how good of an actor he was in season one, in the first half of season two, and to see him kind of reduced to in some of the episodes, wobbling around, it was really disheartening to see. And I'm not going to say it took me out of it necessarily, but the fact that you saw that going on with him, as well as the fact that that was oddly enough the point where the series started to have problems, as far as storytelling goes. Um, it was just, it wasn't a good spot to be in for him, and I guess it wasn't a good spot for the show to be in at all. And they even tried to, I think maybe bring a replacement in. There was an episode called "In at the End of the Road," where this character named Doc, played by guest star Nicholas Campbell, um, he does a good job with this new character. He's a he's a doctor. He's also a helicopter pilot, and his skills happen to come in handy when Hawk's incapacitated. But at that point, though, Jan Michael Vincent was so unpredictable, I guess, in terms of okay, is he going to be able to do a good job today, or is he going to be wobbly? And so at that point, you kind of, even if you don't know the behind the scenes drama, you kind of were able to infer that, okay, they're trying to see, one, how, good Nicholas Campbell is in this guest role, and also how likable his character is. So maybe we can bring him in to replace Stringfellow Hawk, if Jan Michael Vincent's, unreliable. But Doc only shows up for 2 episodes, and then as far as I know, you don't see him again. So so that was just really weird. It was like I liked his character, I liked Doc's character, but just the fact that it was so obvious that they were trying to test the waters with a new character to take Hawk's place, it was just like awkward. Anyway, though, so yeah, season two, unfortunately, not as enjoyable. Not as enjoyable as the first half. The second half of season two, not as good as the first half. Although I will give it credit for last 3 episodes, Severance Pay, Eruption, and Short Walk to Freedom. All 3 of those episodes are good, top tier Airwolf episodes. And you basically see, everything that was good about the series coming into play in all 3 of those episodes. Severance Pay, you get, the espionage angle that, made the first season so good. You get some really fine acting from everyone involved. It's suspenseful, and you get emotionally invested in the situation. And when you find out, who the bad guy is, and just, how far along they are in their scheme, you're like, oh, you creep. so yeah, so you want the bad guys to get what's coming to them, and and basically, the firm, they get more of a spotlight. So it was good to see that. Eruption, that was probably one of the better domestic threat angles, because you take a natural catastrophe, in this case, dormant volcano, causing all sorts of havoc, along with villains in a small town. You combine the two together, and also the fact that Airwolf is sort of put out of commission, and Hawk and Santini are having to sort of work with the townspeople to fight the bad guys, as well as to you know survive this volcano. That was a pretty good episode too, and it was well acted, and there were, to some degree, it was even suspenseful, especially when you see the disaster footage. Short Walk to Freedom was the season finale, and that was definitely a good note for season two to end on, because everyone's on top of their game. Everyone's working well together. The story's good. The villains are menacing, and also Airwolf was basically put in a position where it was out of commission, and so um, the characters are having to improvise, um, to kind of keep it moving on the ground by literally pulling it along in a really hostile environment. And Santini's having to sort of manually operate the weapons, which for how badly the damage the copter was isn't an easy task. So there's a certain amount of suspense in that episode, but um, but it was a good way for the season to end on. And I mean, I will say that the amount of ho hum episodes that the second half of season two has, unfortunately, it kind of weighs things down. But you know, it's still worth watching. Season two is still a decent season. I mean, it's still if you liked season one of Airwolf, definitely check out season two. Just bear in mind that after the episode Condemned, it starts to go downhill, but then in the last three episodes, it pulls itself back up together. And honestly, I would say that if they had ended Airwolf with season two, I think it would have been a good way, for the show to end on. I mean, granted, there are a couple of other, plot threads that were left dangling, but the way it ended, I think that, the show would be a little more fondly remembered, overall, than what it actually was, because I haven't seen seasons 3 and 4 yet, but by most accounts, 3 and 4, they're not good. I mean, I don't know yet, haven't watched it yet. That's just what I've heard and read. So I am going to watch season 3, but I will admit that just based on the less than stellar second half of season 2, I'm not quite as in a hurry to check out season 3 as I thought I'd be, which is kind of a bummer. But I mean, I'd like to think that, like, in an ideal world, Jan Michael Vincent, say maybe season 2 ends, Jan Michael Vincent, he goes to intense rehab, gets the alcoholism, drug issues under control, and then maybe, he and the cast members and the people, run the show, they're like, hey, okay, let's give the series, an ending where all the plot threads are wrapped up, as opposed to just a good season finale, so maybe, yeah, I mean, it would have been cool if they'd gotten together to do like a movie or, maybe a 2 or 3 part mini series that tied up all the loose ends. But overall, though, I mean, I think that would have been a nice way to end the series. But as it is, some people might be inclined to, stop watching Airwolf, after the end of season 2. Like once season 2 ends, that's by most accounts, where the series, should have ended, or at the very least, that was the series, it would have been a good stopping point. Anyway, though, I'm going to give Airwolf, season 2 of Airwolf, 3 out of 5 stars. It was decent. If it had been made up strictly of the episodes, in the first half, and skipped everything in between Condemned and Severance Pay, I think that I would have had no problem rating this season 4 out of 5 stars. But taking everything into account, the good first half and the less than stellar second half, I gotta go with 3 out of 5. But yeah, not as good as the first season, but it's still worth watching. Still overall an enjoyable season. Some of the best episodes of the series are definitely in this season. So yeah, if you liked season 1, definitely check out season 2. Um, Thank you for taking the time to listen to this review or watch this review. And got any questions, comments? Drop a line. Let me know. Y'all have a good night. Thanks.